7 years ago, at one of the most vulnerable periods in my life, I hired a man named Brad Trowbridge, who was acting like a lawyer and defrauded me. Brad's actions led to me losing my children and are part of a snowball effect of what happens when you're the victim of corruption that's still isolating me now and keeping me from working, supporting myself, and having access to the society I used to be welcomed in. That's what corruption does. It's just very hard to be a victim of corruption in America because people aren't used to it yet. They think it doesn't happen here. It's March 23rd, 2026. My name is Megan Mason, and if you do a little research, you'll find that I'm not a reliable narrator. I'm regarded by several government bodies officially as a profoundly confused and damaged woman. But that's because I told the truth about the corruption. So I'm revisiting this video because a couple reasons. I don't think enough people saw it. I like to think that if people understand that you can cheat in Chicago family courts and buy children's custody, I like to think people will stand up for us. And we're still trying, the other victims and me, of family courts all around the country, and I'm going to keep trying. But the other reason I'm revisiting this video is because I used the Wayback Machine. Although Brad Trowbridge was working as an unsuccessful divorce attorney when he got his break and was endorsed by the Cook County machine to become a judge, he got squeezed in as a traffic judge because there was a vacancy, and I believe it was uncontested. And all of these powerful Democrats decided that Brad Trowbridge should be a judge because Michael Bender, a powerful guardian ad litem and a patron in the Cook County machine, told them to give Brad Trowbridge their endorsement. And the other thing I noticed is I feel like I smile a lot, especially at the beginning of this video, which, I mean, when you're on camera, you like instinctively, hi, I want to smile, but I feel like I look like a dipshit because I'm talking about bad things. But I think part of it is I think I was a happier person then, because when I filmed this, I thought I was getting my kids back in like 2 weeks. I was really misguided. I really thought, because I had been a whistleblower for a year at this point. This is 2022. No, the video I'm showing you now was filmed in 2023, but it was 2022 when I was issued my whistleblower numbers. So I always thought the cavalry was just around the corner to rescue me. And that was part of the reason I decided to loudly talk about everything that I had testified about, because I thought if I'm really loud about being a witness, everyone in Chicago will want to get me out of their court and they'll want to not have things to do with me, which is what I wanted. I didn't want anything to do with corrupt judges, and I wanted them to think Megan's a snitch. I shouldn't want anything to do with her. How about we stop bringing her to court? Because I was already divorced, so there was no reason for me to be there except for to destroy my life, and I guess you would call it retaliate against me for my testimony. But I was the same person cognitively. I had the same beliefs. I don't mention this in the video because I knew then just as much as I know now that it also makes me sound nutty. Whenever I talk about the involvement of federal law enforcement in my life, it makes me sound nutty. So I'm trying to get people to believe me. I'm trying to get people to help me. So I downplay the nutty stuff. But when I filmed this, I believed every nutty thing I believe now, which it's not that sometimes U.S. Marshals follow me. It's that always so many U.S. Marshals follow me that I don't look out a window without a virtual barricade of them, perimeter. And that sounds weird. It is weird. but it was true then, it's true now. And that's partly why I want to get things on the record. Because even if I'm not here, I want my kids to be able to be made whole.
A lawyer named Brad Trowbridge committed fraud against me while I was his client. He basically orchestrated and conspired with others to orchestrate a contempt ruling against me by committing fraud on at least 8 occasions. He did this for the benefit of my ex-husband, Peter Matt, who is a known financial criminal. And he did it in coordination with Judge Robert Johnson, the trial judge on my case, and a powerful court appointee named Michael Bender. During the course of these crimes, Brad Trowbridge committed at least 8 acts of documented fraud. And while I'm not certain why he did this, the fact that he committed the fraud is really indisputable. But I suspect that he defrauded me at the behest of Michael Bender, Michael Bender has hidden and assisted my ex-husband in his financial crimes. And this suggests a financial motive for Michael Bender. It's my suspicion that Michael Bender, in turn, facilitated endorsements so that Brad Trowbridge could become a judge. That's my suspicion. But again, the fraud is indisputed. That's just my theory as to why. It's really up to Mr. Trowbridge to say why he did it. So in this video, I'm going to first talk about how Brad Trowbridge first gained my trust and emotionally manipulated me so that he could commit this fraud. Then I'm going to detail the actual fraud scheme, which lays out the ways that he committed multiple acts against me in order to orchestrate a contempt ruling. Third, I'm going to explain the evidence that I have that Brad Trowbridge was doing this at the behest of the court appointee Michael Bender, also an attorney. And finally, I'm going to explain why I believe that Brad Trowbridge did this in order to become a judge and how I think it might have happened. Again, that's my theory. It's a conspiracy theory as to the why, but not as to whether the conspiracy happened. That's a proven fact. So first, how I met Brad Trowbridge. I met Brad Trowbridge for the first time in the spring of 2019. I was introduced to him after my ex-husband had started making some alarming phone calls and emails to my church, and people there became concerned about domestic violence. First, he had called Jillian, who is I'm not going to use last names or even the name of my church because I don't think that's necessarily important here, but he called Jillian and said that he didn't like what was going on here. And he later emailed her and said that if you or if Megan brings the children to church again, he would call the police. And this was really strange because there's no basis to call the police. I was taking the children to Sunday school at a church we'd been attending since 2 years before our divorce. At this time, we'd been divorced for 2 years, and Sundays by parenting plan, which is in effect law, was my parenting time. So he had no legal basis to harass me, but the church community was concerned about somebody that controlling and the other pattern of domestic abuse. So they wanted me to have an attorney. And Jillian introduced me to some other domestic violence advocates in my church, who in turn introduced me to a group called Lifespan. And Lifespan provides free or subsidized legal support to women leaving an abusive relationship. But because I didn't have a pattern of physical violence, I wasn't the profile of the client they serve. But they did give me a list of attorneys who are friendly to women leaving domestic violence or domestic abuse situations. And one of the individuals on that list was Brad Trowbridge. And at some point, I made my first introductory call to him. And I liked him a lot because he really reflected back to me that he understood the type of controlling narcissist who my ex-husband is and who uses courts to abuse their spouse. He not only said he understood it, but he explained he was a trained social worker and formerly a licensed social worker who specialized in women like me who he saw as victims of domestic violence. But I did not have the money for an attorney and really didn't think I needed one then, so I didn't hire him. But then later in that summer, around June 2019, the judge in our case appointed Michael Bender, an attorney, former judge, son of a former judge, as what's called a guardian ad litem. A guardian ad litem is usually appointed during a divorce. Under Illinois law, they're appointed during any proceeding. There really was no proceeding in the court because we were already divorced. The proceeding was the appointment of the guardian ad litem. I didn't have an attorney at the time. I just knew I was opposed, and I asked him to please not do this because I just sensed intuitively that it was a diminishment of my parental rights. I now understand, because there was actually no case in front of Judge Johnson, that it was a direct violation of Illinois law. And 4 years later, Michael Bender is still the guardian ad litem, and because there was no proceeding before the case, he's become the permanent guardian ad litem, which is not something envisioned by Illinois law. But back to Brad Trowbridge. So when Michael Bender was appointed, I knew I needed an attorney because I wanted to get rid of him. So I called up Michael Bender, or Bradley Trowbridge, and told him that a guardian ad litem was appointed, and I really wanted his help getting him removed. And right away, Brad Trowbridge suggested that I should not try to get the guardian ad litem removed because he thought it might hurt his feelings. And he explained to me that guardian ad litems are not just very powerful, but Bradley Trowbridge and literally every other attorney I've ever spoken to, so I'm not singling anyone out, in the Domestic Relations Division of the Circuit Court of Cook County has told me that when a guardian ad litem is appointed, they're in charge of everything, and what they say goes. And if you want things to go your way, you need to make the guardian ad litem happy, no matter what. And so he encouraged me not to get rid of Michael Bender, but to try to get his help to stop problem behaviors by my ex-husband. So I did retain Michael Bender, or I didn't willfully retain Michael Bender. He was appointed, and I retained Brad Trowbridge around June 11th, 2020. So, or 2019, I'm sorry. So there wasn't much activity other than me asking to try to get Michael Bender removed. But we did, my ex-husband and I, as often happened with my ex-husband, had a conflict around October of 2019 because he was upset because he felt that I was violating an order from the judge that a certain type of therapy continue for our son. Our son has special needs, and although no doctors ever prescribed it, my ex-husband really cares about him participating in a type of therapy called applied behavioral analysis. And I've always eagerly participated too, because my ex-husband is a very neglectful person, and I've always liked, and ABA therapy provides a therapist on site, so I felt it was a way for me to know there was childcare for both my son who has disabilities and my younger son. But it's incredibly expensive, and at times I was making, for most of this time, I was making less than $55,000 a year, didn't have a car in most cases, and really was struggling to meet my living expenses, so it was something I couldn't afford. But as part of my ex-husband's long pattern, he made a case that I was willfully not participating in a therapy because I couldn't get blood out of a stone to pay for it. So Judge Johnson had issued an order, ABA shall continue, both parents participating. And I had, in order to not be less poor and pay for things like ABA therapy, I was in the process of starting a new job around October 2019. And I had enrolled the children in after-school care on Mondays and Tuesdays. And our son couldn't have ABA therapy there because the school wouldn't allow it. I did ask them. And I did have it on Sundays as long as therapists were available, and participated to the best of my ability. So Brad Trowbridge told me I had nothing to worry about because he explained that an order of contempt from a court is a very high burden to meet. You know, the parent doesn't just have to violate the order, but they have to be doing it willfully and not have a good reason. And usually employment's a really good reason. And also the order was just the ABA continue. It didn't say a set number of hours or days. So there was no way that I could be found in contempt. So that, to my knowledge, was the last that there was any legal conflict in October 2019. But as I would later learn, there were other filings, but Brad Trowbridge was hiding from me. So in March, between March 2020 and August 2020, Brad Trowbridge acted to defraud me. Basically, he conspired with others to have me found in contempt of court by default by not letting me know that I was being accused of contempt. And when they were not letting me, since I didn't know there was accusation, I wouldn't know there were court hearings. So he didn't let me know the court hearings were taking place. And he committed many acts when I asked and might have discovered, or other ways that I might have discovered, he prevented me from knowing. So first, to my knowledge, Brad Trowbridge first learned about the contempt allegation on March 10th, 2020. On March 10th, 2020, according to an affidavit or an attestation by my ex-husband's attorney under penalty of perjury, he sent Brad Trowbridge what's called a petition for rule to show cause, or PRTSC. And this is what you file when you're saying the other parent is violating a court order. You can throw her in jail, you can give her fines, and most importantly, all those things that have been threatened against me are done. But most importantly, it's a way to disparage the other parent. Like, look, this woman violates court orders that are about the health and care of her child. And in fact, it's been the primary, if not the only reason that Judge Johnson ostensibly revoked my parental rights. I don't think he remotely thought it was related to my children's well-being, and has prevented me from any contact. But I'll get to that later. So Brad Trowbridge, Christopher Werman attested that he sent this to Brad Trowbridge. Brad Trowbridge did not tell me that I was being accused of contempt, served with a PRTSC, or tell me there was a scheduled court date. I would later look back at Brad Trowbridge's invoices and notice that on his March invoice, he billed me on March 10th, 2020 for reviewing Peter's PRTSC. I don't think I knew what a PRTSC was at that time, but he did say that he did bill me for it, which I later discovered. On March 20, 2020, Brad Trowbridge received an email from the court telling him there was a court postponement. So maybe if he had forgotten that I had been served, he could have remembered then, but he did not tell me I was being accused of contempt of court, and he did not tell me there was a court date. On April 15th, 2020, I happened to email Brad Trowbridge, and referring to COVID lockdowns, I said, I'm personally quite pleased no motions are being filed right now. A nice break. And on that same date, Brad Trowbridge wrote back, yes, unfortunately, it took a pandemic to stop Peter's legal abuse of you. He did not tell me about that I was being accused of contempt of court, and he did not tell me about a court date. On April 20, 2020, Brad Trowbridge received an email from the court about a postponement. He did not tell me I was being sued, and he did not tell me about a court date. On July 6, 2020, there appears to have been a status hearing. Judge Johnson on this date entered an order of continuance stating the court being advised on the premises, which I'm a lay person, but I think that means the people told me in court. They didn't send me a letter. So there was a status hearing. And by agreement of counsel, in this order it says, which means both attorneys agreed that the case was continued. So this suggests to me that Brad Trowbridge was actually at this status hearing. He had not told me that he was going to court in my case, and he had still not told me I was being sued. On July 13th, 2020, I read about Zoom court on the Guardian ad litem Michael Bender's bill and asked Trowbridge, Zoom court, what? And he implied that he did not attend, saying, we had a court date on July 6th that I had on my calendar as July 7th. He also did not disclose that I was being sued, asking, it looks like a lot of activities have been lumped into one line item. Anything I need to know? He did not inform me. He did inform me of an upcoming status hearing, but not the contempt allegation. And he advised me not to attend the next status hearing. That had actually been advice that Brad Trowbridge gave me early on. He had told me that a judge would like me more as a woman if he didn't see me as argumentative and prone to conflict. So he said, I'm going to go to court and do the fighting for you, and if you're not there, you still get to seem nice. So he advised me not to attend the July 20 status hearing. On July 20th, 2020, thinking the only matter for the status hearing was for Michael Bender to step down, because Brad Trowbridge had also told me the winter before, Bender said if nothing's filed, he's going to file a motion to withdraw. So I just assumed COVID had delayed that and we were finally getting rid of him. So I said, did Michael make a motion to be removed? And I again asked Brad Trowbridge, anything filed against me? Actually, he had emailed me earlier in the day, but I missed it. So on July 20th, 2020, Brad Trowbridge removed the proof of service. So when you get a motion or a PRTSC, it usually attached to it, or at least at the same time, according to the procedures in Illinois, you will get a proof of service and usually a notice of when the presentment is. So that tells you when you are served, which is important, and it also tells you when the court date is. He removed those because they would have shown that he got it 4 months earlier. And he wrote, Peter filed this and it was supposed to be up in April when the courts were closed. At this time, I didn't know about the rules of service. I didn't even know what a docket is or that I could go back and look at this stuff. So I just took him at his word, and I really didn't understand the irregularities that probably to an attorney would have been obvious by now. Other than these emails, I'd had no contact with Bradley Trowbridge. We didn't have meetings or phone calls, and I'd had absolutely no contact with the trial judge, Robert Johnson, or the guardian ad litem, Michael Bender, or Judge Johnson's clerk, Kay Mason, or my ex-husband's attorney, Christopher Werman, since the winter of 2019. So I would say, at the latest, or at the most recent January 2020, I'd had absolutely no contact. On July 21, I'd still had no contact with him. 2020, Judge Robert Johnson himself or his clerk, Kay Mason, entered an order with participant Megan Matt, which is my married name, file appearance allowed. Now, again, I didn't know this at the time because this was a docket entry, and I didn't know what a docket was at that time. But a year later, when I discovered other irregularities, I asked the clerk at the court what that meant. And she said, well, that means that you filed a request asking the judge to appear pro se, which is what you do when you don't have an attorney. But at this time, July 21, 2020, Brad Trowbridge was my attorney to my knowledge and did not let me know he was quitting until October 2020. So I thought I had an attorney, and I did nothing to indicate I wanted to file a pro se appearance. So this was a fraudulent entry. And my suspicion is that, like orchestrating me missing court dates, orchestrating me not filing a response to a serious allegation of contempt of court, the fake fraudulent pro se appearance was meant to suggest Megan doesn't show up for court dates. She doesn't respond to a contempt allegation. She's crazy. She fired her own attorney. And all of it is part of an effort to discredit me, which Judge Johnson, as I'm recording this, is still persisting in.
So looking back at this point, I am very careful around talking about Judge Johnson and Kay Mason. And the best way I can describe this is what I call the Rosemary's Baby effect. If you're somebody who's been the victim of a conspiracy, it is your brain doesn't want to process one conspiracy, right? Like the idea that I had a lawyer who was sneaking around. This is like from movies in the 1930s. My brain is like, no, this doesn't happen. So when you add, every time you add someone to the conspiracy, it's like, it's just ridiculous. But that's kind of how conspiracies work. That's what's confounding about it is they are kind of contagious, and you do get these rotten systems where you do have these people working in the office of the clerk who will just do what anyone tells them to. Everyone's just really dirty, and that happens. But there's this veneer of normality because it's a government institution. So it really took my brain a long time to admit just how crooked Judge Robert Johnson is. And so when I was saying this, I still wanted to think that somehow he had been tricked or misled. And so I only mentioned one fraudulent appearance. After I recorded this, I've now found 3 fraudulent appearances, all entered by Judge Johnson and his clerk, Kay Mason. 3 specific times when he didn't even enter an order because there was no paper involved. They just went into the computer filing system and said that he allowed an order. There's no order to be pulled. That was something, again, when I went to pull the docket the first time in 2021, I didn't know what a docket was. So I didn't even really understand everything I was looking at. So I went back because I was like, well, I should see the appearance that was filed because there should be a paper. Because when I've represented myself, the state of Illinois has a form. An attorney, I don't know if they can just stand up and say they appear themselves or if they file a paper, but pro se people file a paper. And they actually enter a motion, a written one. But the 3 times Judge Johnson committed fraud and said that I went to him and wanted to appear myself, there is no paper. So there's nobody. When I first read this, I thought that someone logged in and put in a fake entry. But it was Judge Johnson and Kay Mason just did the fraud 3 times.
So at this same time, when I learned about the pro se appearance, so this was around June 2021, a year after all of this, I also learned that postcards had been sent from the court to me informing me about postponed court dates. Now, if I had received it, there were 3 sent in all. If I had received one of them, I would have known that I had a court date. And if I had known I'd had a court date, I would have asked Brad Trowbridge more specific questions, like, why am I supposed to go to court? Because he had still not told me I was being sued. So the reason I didn't receive them is because someone changed my mailing address. For the 4 years prior to these events, my address had been 423 Linden Avenue, Wilmette, Illinois, 60091. Someone logged into the court's system, at least I actually don't know how it was changed. An employee at the court, when I asked, why is my address wrong? She said, actually, you changed it. And I said, I did not change it. And she said, well, you used your email to log in. And I said, I did not use my email to log in. And what is my email? Thinking, and now certain, that if an email was used to make these changes, it was a fraudulent email. And she would not tell me what email was used. And so this was in June 2021. For 2 years, I've made exhaustive efforts to find out what email was used and why my address was changed. And Clerk Iris Martinez has not helped me. And in fact, my address is still 423 Linda Avenue, Chicago, 68091. So because it was changed, the postcards were mailed and returned, addressee not found.
I did go to the e-filing system through Tyler Tech, and it looks like some efforts have been made by the new clerk to at least standardize the login so it matches the rest of the state. But my contact information is still incorrect. It looks like instead of the false address and email that they had in there, they replaced it and just gave me 2 Megan Mason contacts with identical information. But then a third service contact was added, which is really bonkers because, and yes, I did check. This isn't opposing counsel. This is supposedly my service contact is Christopher Werman, who is Peter Matt's attorney, who I have very publicly alleged to be either a member of federal law enforcement or very, very fervently committed to federal law enforcement's prosecution of a case against Peter Matt, his client.
So another thing that I noticed about the contempt allegation, the PRTSC, so this is back in July 2020, when Brad Trowbridge finally gave me the contempt allegation. He'd been hiding for 4 months. There were no exhibits. There was no evidence. So I was relieved, because if somebody, says you rob a bank and they don't have any evidence and you didn't rob a bank, you just say, I didn't rob a bank. It's a pretty easy case. So I said, well, what does he want? There are no exhibits. There's nothing to argue. And there never really were exhibits because I wasn't in contempt of court. But in August 2020, I did attend a hearing where Brad Trowbridge offered no defense, and I was rapidly found in contempt of court. And again, this contempt ruling not only caused me extreme financial pain and has contributed to my bankruptcy, but Judge Johnson used this directly when he revoked my parenting rights, and he's even gone so far as to issue a restraining order so that I can't send my son a birthday card, and it's his birthday on Sunday. Immediately after the ruling, because there were no evidence, it just seemed pretty crazy. I genuinely didn't suspect at that point that Robert Johnson was engaged in the fraud. I didn't know about the fraudulent entries. I didn't know that Brad Trowbridge had actually probably been in court, and Robert Johnson hadn't committed financial crimes as he would later do. I just thought COVID made people crazy and he had a bad day. So I called up Brad Trowbridge and I was really upset, and he agreed, it was crazy. And I said, well, I want to appeal. And he said, well, I think the better thing is to file a motion to reconsider. And I was very confident it would be overturned because there was no evidence. So I thought that was a good reason to overturn it. But I would later learn, although Brad Trowbridge said he would file a motion to reconsider, he didn't tell me there was a 30-day timeline, and he did not file a motion to reconsider. And he quit, notably after, again, the timeline for a motion to reconsider had passed. I do not believe that Brad Trowbridge fixed my case for his own interest alone. I believe he did this at the behest of Michael Bender. And I have some specific reasons for thinking that. First of all, Brad Trowbridge always told me that Michael Bender was in charge of every aspect of this case. And this case, from 2019 onward, I know to be based on fraud. So that means Michael Bender is in charge of the fraud by the statements of not just Brad Trowbridge, but Judge Johnson and every other attorney, and Mr. Bender's statements. So I also have specific concerns about the interactions between Brad Trowbridge and Michael Bender from the time I first retained Brad Trowbridge. I sent him a signed and executed retainer agreement, which, was also signed by him, I believe, and a payment on June 11th, 2019. However, Brad Trowbridge didn't file an appearance until July 5th, 2019. The only reason that I hired Brad Trowbridge was to get rid of Michael Bender. The easiest way to get rid of Michael Bender would have been to file a motion to reconsider the order, or an appeal, but probably a motion to reconsider. The deadline for a motion to reconsider was 30 days. July 5th, 2019 was 31 days after the order appointing Michael Bender. So that seems, the delay seems unreasonable and seems to have benefited Michael Bender. I also know that during the time that I genuinely thought Brad Trowbridge was my attorney, he spoke to Michael Bender about my case. And So on June 11th, I believed I hired Brad Trowbridge. And on June 26th, 2019, I wrote to Brad Trowbridge that I met with Michael Bender yesterday. That was our first meeting. He also mentioned you two had spoken. So I know that before addressing the court, an attorney is required to file an appearance. And I do believe Michael Bender was the court. So I'm concerned as to whether he was even allowed to speak about my case to Michael Bender before filing an appearance. But I mean, more to the point, I'm concerned that this suggests he was not working in my interest. We know at some point he stopped working at my interest. And when someone's defrauded you, you know, it's sort of like, it's hard to be a little bit pregnant and it's hard to be a little bit defrauded by an attorney who's pretended to be your mental health advocate and your protector. So at first, I didn't understand what could possibly have motivated Brad Trowbridge to commit these acts of fraud, because I do believe them to be serious crimes. And at first, I thought, I found out he had a custody supervision business. I thought maybe he was, you know, getting referrals for that, but that seems like a lot. I thought maybe my ex-husband directly bribed him, but cash bribes are pretty hard to facilitate. And at that point, I hadn't quite realized what structures my ex-husband would probably use to provide kickbacks. And I do believe those structures are more intended to provide kickbacks to Michael Bender. So, but I figured in 2022, I found out that Brad Trowbridge was running to become a circuit court judge. And it's my belief that he fixed my case at the behest of Michael Bender, who was able to help Brad Trowbridge to get a Democratic Party nomination by getting him powerful endorsements. That's my suspicion. It's just a theory. Again, I know Trowbridge committed crimes. I know Bender committed crimes. If they have other reasons, they're welcome to explain what the reasons. This is just my theory. But first of all, just to understand, if you become a circuit court judge, it's worth millions of dollars when you consider the years of salary, the years of pension, and the fact that, and I would know better than anyone, it's almost impossible to get a judge fired. I would go so far as to say, even if Brad Trowbridge is indicted for all of these things, he could still keep his job. That's the ethical milieu of the Circuit Court of Cook County. So, and the reason that I don't know a lot about the power structures in the Circuit Court of Cook County, I suppose like anybody, I've read about the Democratic Party machine. And I know it's a real thing. I almost always vote a straight blue ticket, so I'm part of the problem. When you have one party, it often gets concentrated and often gets corrupted. So within the Circuit Court of Cook County, I do know that guardian ad litems are incredibly politically powerful. You know that because they are a guardian ad litem. It's a very choice appointment, and you get that by having serious political pull. I believe people have told me that Michael Bender is a particularly influential person, which if you ever meet Michael Bender is really shocking because he's not somebody you would guess could pass the bar, but based on his demonstrated cognitive ability. But he is the son of a powerful judge, and I think he does have political influence. And I know that in 2020, Brad Trowbridge had previously sought to run as a circuit court judge. He received no nominations and he lost that bid. And when I say run the election, because it's virtually a one-party system in Cook County, the election is the Democratic Party nomination. That's what matters, because sometimes you're uncontested. There isn't even another candidate. I think that was the case for Brad Trowbridge. But even when it's contested, the Democrat wins. So that's the real race. So I know he had no endorsements, but in 2022, Brad Trowbridge received the full support of powerful Chicago Democrats. And it's not something I can understand because he Brad Trowbridge was not a high-profile attorney. He doesn't write papers. He doesn't teach. He was a down-at-heel divorce attorney who was working out of a shared office with no secretary. So how he got powerful endorsements is kind of a puzzle to me. And one in particular stood out, which was Representative Jan Schakowsky, and that only stood out because she's my representative. And we're in the North Shore suburbs. Brad Trowbridge is in the city. Again, he wasn't a successful attorney. I'm not sure how their paths would have crossed. So it just doesn't strike me that Representative Schakowsky, when she endorsed Brad Trowbridge, knew him personally, which makes me think somebody asked her for the endorsement. And there's nothing wrong with that. Even after knowing this, I still voted for Jan Schakowsky. That's just how it is. I mean, I'm still more in line with her on the policies. That's part of a representative's job. Sometimes senators write letters for someone's kid to go to West Point. It doesn't mean that they know the kid. Patronage is just part of the job. At the same time, she endorsed Brad Trowbridge after he defrauded me. And because of that, I want to know who asked her to endorse him, or if nobody asked her, why she decided to endorse him. And I'm her constituent, so I think it's a reasonable question to ask. I wrote to her to ask her, and I didn't receive a response, though I've received voluminous requests for donations because I got on her mailing list.
At the time I recorded this, just in general, I think I was trying to be a little bit more polite and circumspect than I am now. I thought I had a chance back then at getting people to believe me. So I guess I was kind of coy sometimes when I was accusing people of serious federal crimes who were in elected office. And that's also just how you have to be in court. That's why I used Judge Johnson's name a lot less early on, because I was actually appearing before him in court. So looking back, I feel like I'm a little coy about Congresswoman Schakowsky. I think I'm a lot more critical and suspicious now. Since then, I've seen more direct ties between Congresswoman Schakowsky and Michael Bender. First of all, we're all neighbors. Brad Trowbridge was in this city, but where I was living in Wilmette was right next to Evanston, where Jan Schakowsky was based, which is right next to Skokie, where Michael Bender lives. And the Skokie courthouse is where my divorce should have been filed, but my ex-husband filed an emergency motion to get it down in Chicago, where the good stuff really happens. And so after this video, I became an ardent follower of Jan Schakowsky's social media, and I noticed that she was posting about a place called Apner Gar, and she secured $300,000 in funding for Apner Gar. I think Apner Gar might be used to funnel kickbacks for people like Schakowsky and Bender. The reason I think this is because of their ties to felonies. So they're both a little suspicious. Before Judge Johnson barred me from any contact with my children, he allowed me supervised visits where I was allowed to see them if I paid a custody supervisor. So if I paid someone $250 an hour, I could be in a room with my children. Then I lost that right, even if I could pay. But I was ordered to use a custody supervisor from an approved list selected by Michael Bender. The first name on the list was a nonprofit called Apner Gar. Apner Gar, I remember it because I called them because they were the first one on the list, and they said, we can't work with you because we only work with South Asian families, which it made me wonder why Michael Bender liked them so much. He would refer them to people who can't even hire them. So that made them a little shady, just being associated with Michael Bender. That's your choice, Apner Gar. I know it's hard to be a nonprofit, but when you work with mobsters, you get in trouble for working with mobsters. So that might happen to you. So I noticed Apner Gar was on the list. And then from trolling Jan Schakowsky's social media, I noticed her holding up a big check and giving it to Apner Gar. It's on my Instagram somewhere. And I noticed that she secured $300,000 in federal funding for Apner Gar and wrote a letter that she had no financial interest. I don't know. I don't know if I believe her. It would be a lot easier to believe the esteemed, honorable Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky if she would just answer my question. I called her years ago. Why did you endorse Brad Trowbridge? It would be very simple to say, someone I trust said he was a good guy. He got my endorsement. I made a mistake. But she won't do that. So I don't intend to stop trolling her until she's in the ground. Although Brad Trowbridge was working as an unsuccessful divorce attorney when he got his break and was endorsed by the Cook County machine to become a judge, he got squeezed in as a traffic judge because there was a vacancy, and I believe it was uncontested. And all of these powerful Democrats decided that Brad Trowbridge should be a judge because Michael Bender, a powerful guardian ad litem and a patron in the Cook County machine, told them to give Brad Trowbridge their endorsement.
So I know Brad Trowbridge defrauded me. I just want to know why. If he didn't do it because he was bribed or received kickbacks, why did he do it? And if he received bribes or kickbacks, what were they? I know that Jan Schakowsky endorsed Brad Trowbridge to be a judge after he defrauded me. If it wasn't because somebody pulled some strings for Brad Trowbridge, I want to know why. And if somebody did pull some strings for Brad Trowbridge, I want to know why. Brad Trowbridge defrauded me. Now he's a judge. I want to know why.
Brad Trowbridge got his job because of corruption, and I believe they're complicit. And it's time for them to stop being complicit and start going after crime in Illinois, even if it's by our team in blue. I still want to know why Brad Trowbridge defrauded me. I still want to know why Michael Bender is a guardian ad litem, even though he's a moron and a felon. I want these people stopped. And I know people in Illinois don't believe me that there's a federal prosecution, but I know there is. Federal prosecutors did write to me, and there is involvement in this case. I think if we could stop the corruption, then we wouldn't have to worry about these criminals making any excuse for federal authorities to disenfranchise the people of Illinois. And as I say this, again, I'm not a reliable narrator. I could just be really crazy. But as I say this, I am looking at an America where there is a tyrant who's out of control, might drop a nuclear bomb on Iran before I finish this video. And for some reason, instead of arresting low-level dirty politicians, this case is still going on. So that makes me fear that federal prosecutors might want to use the corruption of some criminals to take serious action against the voters of Illinois. That's wrong.